But first, it's my exclusive sit-down with former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. So he's been on a fact-finding mission to Texas in order to see their methods for stopping, or, well, until very recently anyway, not stopping, the flood of illegal migrants. He's got some quite interesting solutions as well, certainly when it comes to what could be going on in the Channel. Take a look. Jenrick, I understand that you've been to see the southern border in America. What's it like there? Why are you there? And how is it relevant to us here in the UK?
Well, hi, Patrick. As you know, I've been making the argument that we are in an age of mass migration and that all developed countries like the UK, Europe and the United States are going to be facing a generational issue of millions of people on the move, looking to come primarily for economic prospects, and that we need to take the most robust action possible. And that's why it's very important that we learn from what other countries are doing and experiencing. And the United States is in the midst of a migration crisis. I think that's a portent of what could happen here in the UK if we don't go further, faster. And so I wanted to see for myself what is happening down on the US southern border. And last year, over 3 million illegal migrants crossed that border, over 300,000 in the month of December alone. So it's a very serious situation. But there are some politicians who are taking that robust action. And the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, a Republican, is one of those who's trying to battle with this issue. And I wanted to see some of the work that he and others have been doing there and what we might be able to learn from it back home in the UK. And one of the things I saw, which I've strongly supported in the past, is the use of physical infrastructure like buoys that can blockade rivers like the Rio Grande. I implemented those as immigration minister on the canals and the estuaries of northern France, and I think that is something that we should take up now on a much bigger scale with the French, putting them in the shallow waters off the beaches of northern France to stop the boats in a humane way from ever getting into the English Channel. And the other thing I was very struck by here in the United States, particularly from the Republicans who are seized with this issue, is the fact that they, like me, treat this as a national security issue. They are very concerned about the number of criminals, those linked to the narcotics trade, serious organized crime, and even extremists and terrorists, people coming from countries that are hostile to us and to Western values, crossing the border. That is something that I saw as immigration minister, and I want the UK to treat this as a national security emergency. Border security is national security.
So could you just drill down on a couple of those points for me? So what would this situation look like if we put buoys off the French coast, or would you ever consider something like a barge blockade or something along those lines? And the other point that you made there about this being such an issue of national security, we know about the drug cartels, etc., coming across the border in America, but you saw behind the curtain as immigration minister about some of the people who are coming across the Channel as well.
That's absolutely right. Well, on the first point, as immigration minister, I worked with the northern French authorities to create buoy blockades on canals and estuaries that were being used for what's known as taxi boats, where the people smugglers get people off the shore, gather together groups, and then get quickly out into the open sea. That was extremely effective. That was one of the most effective interventions we made last year and contributed to the 30% reduction in small boat arrivals in the UK. We need to go much further. And I think there is appetite for that from our interlocutors in France. They can see it works. So let's get those blockades on more of those estuaries, and let's get them into the shallow waters just off the key beaches, not in the open, dangerous waters, but in the shallow waters, so that people can quickly see that they're not going to be able to get the boats into the English Channel. I think that would make a big difference and could be done quickly, most importantly, because time is absolutely of the essence. And then on your second point, I really do think that we have to view this as a national security emergency, because we know little, if anything, about these people who are breaking into our country on small boats. And what we've learned is that there is a very significant link between some of them and serious organized crime. If you look at the Albanians who are coming across, a very strong link, for example, with the drug trade in the UK. And I can tell you that some of the issues are even more serious than that, and that there are individuals who come across on small boats who are being monitored by our security services every day because they are deemed to be a risk to our security and would actually do real harm to British citizens. That is why we've got to take this seriously. That's why I've always advocated for the policy of Rwanda, where we actually detain people as soon as they arrive and get them out of the country within days. As you know, I'm sceptical about the way in which the government is proceeding with that. But I think it is important that everyone understands what's at stake here, particularly if you think of those members of the House of Lords who are debating in the weeks ahead the Rwanda bill. This is about national security.
OK, a couple of points now. So would there be any humanitarian concerns about the idea of this blockade? You know, could that potentially lead to people drowning, I suppose, would be the obvious question there. Can I also just ask you about something that emerged this week, which is a bit of a hiccup, I suppose, in the existing law at the moment, where we've kind of been stuck with around 22,500 asylum seekers that we can't grant asylum to, but we can't deport. They're apparently costing us about £1.5 million a day in hotels. This is obviously part of Rishi Sunak, and it was part of Suella Braverman's flagship legislation as well. So could you come back on those 2 points, please?
Well, I think this is actually the most humane thing to do. I've always believed that stopping the boats, even if you're taking very robust steps, is the right thing to do from a humanitarian perspective, because people are dying in the English Channel. You know, people smugglers are feasting on human beings here in terms of the profits that they're making that is being ploughed into other forms of serious criminality. In the United States, 1,000 people have died crossing the southern border through drownings, for example, on the Rio Grande. So this is an absolute injustice. And if we want to tackle this, we've got to take the most robust steps. Remember, as I've always said, the only countries that have resolved this or even made progress, like Greece, like Australia, are those that have been willing to do whatever it takes. The middle way has been tried, tested, and found to fail. And so if you want to stop this, you've got to really take the hardest possible approach, because that is the most humane way to tackle this. And on the other question, which I know that GB News have been featuring in recent days, I think the Illegal Migration Act was right. It said that if you come here illegally, for example, on a small boat, your asylum claim will be inadmissible. You won't have a route to a life here in the UK. And that was a very important principle. And if you think of a case like the Azidi one recently, the horrible individual who appears to have sprayed acid in the face of a woman and child, that individual, if they'd come in under the Illegal Migration Act, would never have even been able to make an asylum claim. Now, obviously, what we've got to do is get the Rwanda policy up and running so that those people can be returned either to their home country, if it's a safe place like Albania, or to a safe third country like Rwanda. That is the model that we've got to pursue. That's why I've argued consistently that the way to do that is to have the strongest possible legal framework that breaks through the barriers of removing people. You know, unfortunately, we've not got there yet. The government wasn't willing to accept my amendment, but I'm hopeful that we can get that policy up and running and that it can work.
What do you make of that? Boys in the Channel, would that work? Would you like to see them go a little bit further, set up some kind of barge blockade? I mean, do you actually think that there's any substance to this? Robert Jenrick now certainly on manoeuvres out there, looking at what's going on at the southern border in America and just feeding that intel back to us right here on GB News.